Hey everybody, as you already know, if you've been watching the YouTube channel, I am in the process of collecting all the Warhammer historical books during their publication. Over the course of that collection, I've been able to talk to Jervis Johnson, so I was very privileged to talk to him. If you haven't seen that, you can also go back to one of the other videos to watch that. In this video, I have the honor and the privilege of also speaking with Rick Priestley about his contribution to Warhammer Historical. We go into a little bit of that. We go into a little bit of the history of Warhammer 40k in general, some of the comings and goings in the studio at Games Workshop. But we also dip our toe into Warhammer Historical. At some point, I probably do want him back just to talk about Warlord Games in general and some of his design philosophies. But for the most part, just enjoy this interview with Rick Priestley. First off, I'd like to say thank you, Rick, for coming on. I really appreciate it. We're going to talk about mainly Warhammer Historical, but there are a few, um, I guess, questions for me for 40k especially. But we talked a little beforehand about Rogue Trader. I guess, what was the brief on Rogue Trader?
Well, first off, hello everybody in Radio Land. But a brief on Rogue Trader, that's interesting.
Were you given a brief?
There wasn't really one. What happened was, when I joined Games Workshop, which was in 1982, way back when, I brought along a game called Rogue Trader, which was a spaceship role-playing combat game. So the idea was that I would take the job at Games Workshop, which I've been resisting, as I wanted to. I really wanted to sort of work as a freelance designer. I was designing models for other companies as well as Games Workshop at the time, and I really wanted to kind of stick with that. But Brian Ansell, who was running Citadel Miniatures at the time, was kind of he wanted to bring me on board because he knew I could do certain things. And he kept offering me a job, and I kept turning him down. And in the end, he offered me, he made me one of those offers that you couldn't refuse.
Right.
So I said, okay, on condition that at some time we publish Rogue Trader, my game Rogue Trader, which I've been trying to sell to you.
Yeah.
And I brought along the model range as well. So that's what happened. And eventually, it became a bit of a running joke, because every time we finished a project and I said, how about we do Rogue Trader next? Brian would say, oh, yes, of course. Oh, but we do need to do. We did the second edition of Warhammer. And eventually it got to the point whereby it was a bit of a running joke. And small children would run up to me at conventions and go, when's Rogue Trader coming out? I think they'd been put up to it, personally. And that's the kind of what happened. So eventually we reached a point where I think we were just bringing out the role-playing game, or we were working on the role-playing game. And at the same time, we acquired a whole bunch of new staff, because TSR UK had kind of gone through a bit of a, I don't think it was a night of the long knives exactly. I think it was a sort of internal rebellion. And the manager had come over to work for Games Workshop. That was Tom Kirby. And he brought along with him some of his friends, who were Phil Gallagher, as I recall, Jim Bamborough, and Mike Brunton, who were all very literate role players. There were a few others as well. I just can't quite remember all their names at the moment. Paul Coburn was amongst them. He's somewhat more of an editor, an organizer, but he's right. Also very good. So what they brought were all these skills in developing role-playing games. And we were in, I think I'd done the first draft of the Warhammer role-playing game. And that got basically handed over to these guys, and they finished it. I did contribute to it, but they basically finished it and started work on all of the supplements for it, like the Enemy Within campaign and so on and so forth. And that's what made it great, to be honest. It wasn't the work I'd done necessarily, although I did the core world building. But they really added lots of content, which was great because it meant suddenly I didn't have to do it. So I said to Brian, how about I do Rogue Trader? And I think at this point he'd gone, oh, all right, you can do Rogue Trader because now all these other people are working on these important things, Warhammer roleplay and all the stuff I want doing. Rogue Trader, it's science fiction. And as Brian always used to say, science fiction does not sell. That was one of his mantras. And he said, okay, you can do Rogue Trader, Rick. Might as well get it out your system. We won't sell many. Because we won't sell many, we're not going to make a big range for it. So here's the brief. So I got there eventually. Was your question. The brief is, we're not going to make much for it. So all the alien races and all races have to be our existing fantasy races.
Oh.
Because all we're going to do is make blister packs full of conversions. So weapons and backpacks and things like that. Okay. So people can take their fantasy figures, cut the spears off, put the ray guns on, and they've got Rogue Trader figures. So that was my first, that was the parameters within which I was working. No new alien races. I sort of did a few, but only as incidental things.
Right.
And then we have to make use of all the figures we already make. And we already did a Judge Dredd line. So I had to incorporate things in that sort of allowed you to use the Judge Dredd models.
Okay.
And that's why Rogue Trader has judges in it.
Yeah.
That I think have remained in the game ever since.
Yeah.
As arbitres, judges, and you were meant to use the Judge Dredd range judges, but no one ever did, of course. And all the monsters in that original book are D&D monsters because at the time we had a D&D license.
Yes.
So the enslavers are I can't what you call them. I forget.
Were they the
these
octopus
round things with eye stalks on?
Oh, right. The beholders.
Beholders. That's it. You got it. Well done.
Yeah.
And so on. And the rust monsters became something, and everything became something else.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we did such a good job of disguising the fact that we didn't, because we couldn't call them by the D&D names.
Yeah.
We did such a good job of disguising the fact that no one would buy the D&D monsters and use them. So, but nonetheless, that was part of the brief, that all those D&D monsters and things had to be in there.
Okay.
Actually, at the time, I think we did some BBC stuff as well, including Doctor Who. And I think the original manuscript had Daleks and Cybermen in under different names.
Oh, okay.
But I think they probably got edited out at the last minute as it was a bit too close. Because I thought they were in, but when I looked the other day, I couldn't find them. So, yeah, that was more or less it. And what I did was I just took the Warhammer game system that we'd been playing with science fiction overlays. I mean, it's really just the most. People ask me, what's the most influential thing about Warhammer 40k, and I always say, well, Warhammer, because it's basically Warhammer in space.
If you look at some of the names, yes, like Space Elves and Space Dwarves, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. The first iteration. It very quickly acquired a character based on that little bit of background I did for the Imperium and the Emperor and the Space Marines.
Yes.
At the core of it.
Yeah.
At the core of it. And other than that, I think it grew in the telling, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very quickly it acquired a character of its own, and myself, together with the rest of the team, developed that. I think it also became obvious very quickly that despite the fact that Brian maintained that science fiction doesn't sell, it was selling like hotcakes.
Yeah.
It really took off, and Brian at that point, being a canny sort of fellow, started to push money at it.
Okay.
And that's why we very quickly got the Space Marine plastics, the Land Raider plastics.
Yeah, I still have a few of those Space Marines.
Yeah, and all those beakies, as they were known.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but when I was developing the game, none of that existed.
Right.
I had a few of the metal limited edition figures, um, like the very first Space Marine that Bob Naismith made.
Okay.
And that was, and then lots of other figures I'd converted, including figures from the historical medieval range, and bits and pieces from the D&D monsters and Lord of the Rings range and all sorts of things. Yeah,
Is that why in those days, like a lot, like I have the Warhammer Siege book from, I think it was third edition
yeah,
Warhammer, but it included 40K, and a
yeah.
lot of it included
I
like
didn't intend to do that originally, and then basically Brian came along and said, "Well, 40K is selling so well, it's become like easily the most popular system almost overnight. That this siege book has to have 40K stuff in it." Oh, great! Thanks, Brian. So shoehorned in,
yeah.
it was a yeah. All of a sudden, everything had to be 40K. Yeah,
Did I guess you mentioned like most of the monsters in the book were from D&D. So what did you base the
yeah.
Tyranids off of?
No, Tyranny is the exception. Actually, they were. I came up with the idea, but I had no real concept of what they looked like. And Nick Bibby, I think it was. Yeah, I'm sure it was Nick. Nick Bibby had this idea for the monster,
Right.
the Tyranid itself, that's illustrated in the Rogue Trader book. In fact, the little drawing is by Nick Bibby, and it was right. It's a weird thing, but it sort of became the basis for the Tyranid relaunch, which Brian sort of took under his wing. What happens when you do have a sort of overnight unexpected success like Rogue Trader, Warhammer 40K, was all of a sudden people start paying attention. As I've already explained, the reason I got to do it in the first place and got to do pretty much what I liked was because nobody was paying any attention. I
Right.
sneaked it in. There was never any concept that it was going to sell. As I say, the mantra in those days was science fiction doesn't sell. And the other mantra was nobody buys aliens.
Right.
So hence we weren't going to make any.
Yeah.
Well, that very quickly got overturned. And I think Brian was a bit annoyed because he'd already done one or two science fiction kind of rules and backgrounds himself,
Mm-hmm.
including things for laser burn and what have you. And he
Yeah.
had a kind of an idea of what a science fiction universe was like based on comic books that he particularly liked, but which I didn't really have a relationship with. But what he saw with the success of 40K was an opportunity to shoehorn in some of those ideas and get little bits of almost like capsule universe in there that he enjoyed.
Yeah.
And the Tyranids was one of those.
Okay.
So he took the idea of the Tyranids and he also had it meshed with the Gene Stealer, which I did separately.
Right.
And the Gene Stealers was sort of based on the alien in Aliens to some
Yes.
extent,
Yeah.
inspired by that anyway. And he probably didn't do it himself. He would have suggested that they be married together for the Space Hulk project, I think.
Okay.
Because the other thing that Space Hulk has, which is very Brian, is in Space Marine Terminators, the big Terminators.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a Brian idea.
Yeah. Because I bought that first edition of Space Hulk. It's my favorite one out of all of them, but
Yeah,
that one and like Space Crusade and all that stuff. Um,
yeah. Well, Richard Halliwell did that.
yeah.
Uh, and as I say, it just incorporated those two ideas. But it just shows you how the game grew very quick, adapted very quickly as other people piled in. We got extra resources, and there was a strong incentive to follow the money. Not least because in these days the company's not very big.
Right.
I won't say we're living hand to mouth, but we're the sort of company that if you have a bit of a hiccup or a disaster, which you can have by over ordering something
Mm-hmm.
easily, you would be in real trouble. So paying the wage bill is still an issue.
Yeah.
Not quite the issue it was when I joined in 1982. It really was an issue in those days. But 10 years later, 5-6 years later, it was still, a small cottage industry, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I think Did who decided? Like, I don't know if it was even a conscious choice of like that the history was malleable in terms of the history of the setting,
Um, well,
or did that just
malleable.
in terms of like right now that like in current 40K, the concept is everything is canon.
Yeah,
So was that a conscious choice or just something that grew because of the necessity? It grew so fast.
yeah. I think. Well, of course, when there was only the book, everything was canon because everything was everything.
Right.
It was all in that book. So, and very quickly we started to add things. And at first, I tried very hard to try and make everything consistent.
Hmm.
And I kept lists of all the places we'd mentioned and the references and so on. But with so many people working on it and other people not necessarily caring, particularly Brian, it got out of hand. It got to the point where keeping it all consistent was difficult. And actually, to be honest, I don't think a lot of customers cared. And one of the obvious examples of that is the way the Space Marine chapters are distributed throughout the galaxy.
Hmm.
If you read the original book and work out the way that hyperspace works, the reason why there are, let's say, 1,000, and that's a nominal number, of course, it's not an
Yeah.
absolute. You know, it's poetic. Um, but the reason why there are so many Space Marine chapters is because to respond to something happening, you need to be within such a distance of it.
Correct. Yes.
It takes like years. It takes decades to get from one end of the galaxy to another. But very quickly, what happens was people want to run a campaign in a store and go, "Oh, the Space Marines are going to have a civil war, so we've got to be able to fight our Space Wolves against our Ultramarines." And I'm going, "Well, they're the opposite ends of the galaxy. They can't do that." And they're going, "Oh, yeah, we don't care." So,
Right.
having created a background which is anything can happen everywhere, because you've put things in throughout the galaxy, all of a sudden it's literally anything can happen anywhere because they can zip from one end of the galaxy to another.
Yeah.
So the backstory to 40k sort of gets compromised from day one, but nobody cares, and nobody cares even now. And it means that the game now is more like World War II in space than
Right.
the sort of futuristic medieval universe that I'd imagined,
Hmm.
where information's slow to evolve over areas where local planetary governors have to be independent because how can
Yeah.
they not be? It's a bit like being, imagine it's 16th century South America
Okay.
and you've got an outpost with conquistadors. I mean, how would they know what was going on in Europe and how do you
Right.
communicate between the two and all that sort of thing? And that was the background I invented was deliberately a sandbox. It was so big
Oh yeah.
that places could be out of communication for hundreds or thousands of years. You could be swept to somewhere on the tides of the warp that was completely unknown, that could be an advanced civilization or a completely barbaric one. It was a sandbox. So I think the idea of canon didn't necessarily, it wasn't important because it was a sandbox. You could go, your Space Marine expeditionary force has been swept by the tides of the warp onto this planet. They have some sort of battle adventure. They escape, but the tides of the warp have now changed, and that planet will never be found again.
Hmm.
So, canon can be it can be anything.
Right. Oh, okay.
If,
Yeah. Yeah.
if you see what I mean, because you can immediately sidestep it.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the best reason why I think 40K has done so well over the years because you don't need to you're not tied to like a specific area or story. You can make up your own and still be like canon, like it still sound official or sounds like it could happen
Yeah,
or it can
I
be
think so.
somewhere.
Games Workshop have compromised that a lot, and they've very much adopted this for the emperor kind of thing,
Yes.
which was always a sort of ironic thing in the original tone.
Yes. Yeah.
Because no one knew really whether the emperor was alive or not,
Right.
and if he was, whether it was in a sort of a chaotic dream state or whether he's sane, or whether he's and how he's directing. And I always imagined it being it being almost like you're communicating via the tarot or a Ouija board,
Yes, yeah.
and that's how the universe is run. It's madly insane,
Yes.
and that insanity of it was part of it. And I remember Andy Chambers once saying to me, "But how does the economy work?" And I was going to him, and I said to him, "The economy works.
we
What makes you think it works?"
but we did it. My friends and I on our other show, we did an episode where we talked about could the Imperium function in real life, and we talked about the economy, different things, and I talked about compared it to the old British Empire, where one part wouldn't know what's going on for weeks on end, if not months,
Yeah.
and things of that nature.
It's more like even more primitive version of that, because by the time the British have an empire, the seaways are fairly navigable and everything. It's more like 16th century
Okay.
and the New World,
Okay.
where you really are.
Where it's much more for a risk and
Yeah,
unknown
and you're relying upon those ships going between the old world and the new world, which are likely to be sunk
yes.
in a storm. You can be lost in a storm or anything like that. And how do you communicate value between these two cultures? I mean, it's almost impossible, isn't it? Because there's no common
Yeah.
trading concept.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really interesting. And the original English settlement in North America, that sort of thing. It's that sort of universe where your supply ship turns up to find that the settlement has been abandoned,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and there are some mysterious graves, and everything else has been burned, and somebody's chipped on a piece of stone, gone to join the native Indians, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It, it's that sort of world, I think, in space.
Did you expect the term grimdark to be a thing the way it
Not
is
really. I
now?
think that was the byline, wasn't it? In the grim darkness of the future, there's any war.
Yeah. So,
Yeah,
but now everyone uses it for like everything. So,
yeah, I know. Well, yeah, it was me being, it was hyperbolic, I know. But then it's taken from that initial paragraph at the very start of 40k,
yes.
which is quite. I was quite pleased with when I wrote it. It has a certain
Oh,
gravitas
yeah.
to it.
It hooked me in. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that the current version of it is much more sanitized.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
much sanitized.
Yeah. It's
They've
changed
taken
over
out.
the years, but I think the
Well,
message
they've
is more
taken
or
out
less
the
the
bit
same.
about let's see the Imperium being made of human flesh and human blood.
Yes.
I think they've taken that out. And I did do something that was deliberately quasi-religious,
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
as well as being quite grim.
Yeah, I remember what hooked me in initially was the it was the box cover for the Epic Space Marine, the first edition,
Oh yeah, okay, yeah,
with the black armored Dark Angels
yeah,
on the cover, and then when I read about the Horus Heresy, and the Horus Heresy is really what got me in for 40k, because the Horus Heresy wasn't those little snippets in a rule book, not necessarily
yeah.
a
To
whole
me, it was
12
part of the
year
deep history. Yeah,
12 year epic.
it's gone on again. That was Brian. Brian wanted to do a epic scale 40k game because he thought that would be a well. It's a trope. It's a wargaming trope, isn't it? Some epic scale or micro scale
Yeah.
armor, and we'd all done it. When we were teenagers, we'd all had micro armor armies in 1/300 scale.
Hmm.
That was just a thing. And his concept was to do it 40k using giant robots because I think he saw them as being a bit of a selling point. I thought giant robot. Yeah, it's a completely surprise to me. I didn't know there were giant robots in 40k. Oh, there you go.
Okay.
All of a sudden, we had giant robots contending, but we couldn't afford to tool two different, so we had to do one red, one blue.
Yes.
So it became a civil war. How do we do that? Oh, I know, let's do it. And I'd written this piece about the Horus Heresy, which I think appears in.
It's in the chapter
It's in chapter
approved.
approved,
Yeah.
the first one.
That's the funniest thing that just these two little lines in chapter approved create this whole
Yeah, absolutely.
ecosystem now.
But I think the idea of there being a rebellion and a deep history. I mean, 10,000 years. It's the last. You think what happened 10,000 years ago? You're back to the last ice age.
Yes.
It was deliberately pushed so far back that it could be treated mythologically. So you'd never have to deal with the reality of it. And then suddenly we go, and now we have the Horus Heresy.
Yes.
And
Well,
it's all, I think, oh my God. It's the same. I was talking about them collapsing the background into World War II, or even one front in World War II. It's the same with the timeline. It's been collapsed so that what happened 10,000 years ago is the same as what's happening for now.
yeah.
Which I found rather disappointing. But there you go. It's been tremendously popular.
Yes, it is.
You can't argue with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's another question about your just thoughts on what's branched out from what you originally conceived.
It branched out very quickly, and I myself was part of that. I think one thing that is perhaps not apparent is that I wrote the game and then I wrote the background. I did the background last.
Okay.
So although the two inform each other to some extent,
Hmm.
I didn't fully grasp where the background was strong
Okay.
because I hadn't written it when I did the game. Uh,
Right.
and when the book came out, it was it was really elements of the background that suddenly became really strongly um, I don't know, characterful,
Right.
uh, particularly in terms of the Space Marines and the Imperium. Because if you think about it, the Eldar got redone very quickly. I just conceived of them as being almost like space pirates.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and then I got together with Jez, and Jez came up with lots of ideas for them, and we respun Eldar
Yeah.
in a much more interesting way, I think.
Yes. Very much so.
Uh, yeah, we never got the chance with the Space Dwarves. Um, and the Imperial Guard were always a little bit of a because I invented them almost as a dump code for all the things we'd done in the past.
Okay.
So is the Imperial Guard. Every planet recruits its own, so they can look like whatever you fancy,
Yeah.
and so on.
That works for
And
the hobby aspect of it too. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And we didn't really even get that down pat until we did the first, second edition army book. The
Okay.
very first army book for the Imperial Guard, when we established those distinct looks. And again, the reason we did so many, the Catachans, Cadians, Mordians, and whatever the others, the reason we did so many is we couldn't decide which one was best or which one worked. So we thought, wait, I tell you what, we'll do half a dozen, see what people like, and take it from there.
Okay.
And that worked quite well.
Yeah. So with the dwarves, was that just eventually when you guys did I think it was second edition, was that just eventually just kind of quietly shelved
Yeah, we couldn't think of anything good to. We couldn't think of anything that was really would work. We felt would work well with dwarves,
on
so
that
we always
scale?
put them on the
Because
back burner.
I'm sorry, on that scale, or because in Epic they had like a full
Yeah, yeah,
blown.
no, we did. We worked them into the epic, and they were in. Gosh, what was it called? I can't remember.
It was
We did
it
the.
was the
Was it
Warlords supplement. It was them and
Yeah, that
orcs
was it.
together. I remember a lot of stuff. So
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, you'd think I'd remember, but it's amazing what you forget. Um, yeah, no. So the concept was always there, but we never got to sort of revisit it for 40k.
okay.
I think Games Workshop have done something more recently, haven't they?
Yeah, they came out with they're called Leagues of Votan now and kind of changed a little bit how they work.
Yeah,
They didn't bring back the land train, but they brought these models that are like big enough you could probably string them together and make a train train out of them. But I mean, people seem to like them. I have an army. Um,
yeah,
uh, obviously it's Games Workshop, so the models are nice. Um, the way they work is very. They don't call them dwarves. They call them squats in Necromunda still, because that's what they're
right.
called on the planet. That's the background behind it.
Yeah,
But in 40k main 40k they're called leagues of Votan, and they're leagues just like the guilds.
yeah.
And then they they changed it a little bit, which I don't I like it, but I think most people do. And but so I mean so far so good. I enjoy the army.
Yeah, well, I don't pay much attention to what 40k do anymore, so I just get little snippets now and again. Uh,
Yeah, and just recently, like, well, obviously, they're bringing back all the Primarchs, at least the demon ones, especially.
okay,
Uh,
I've seen. There's a friend of mine's big 40k player, and he was showing me the Angron, I think it was.
yeah, Angron was
Massive
the
model.
last one. Fulgrim's coming out. They already have, so after when Fulgrim comes out, that's all of them. That's Fulgrim, Mortarion, all the big four for the four
Right.
different gods. Fulgrim,
Yeah.
Mortarion, Magnus, and I'm missing Angron. So Fulgrim's
Yeah.
the latest one to come out with Emperor's Children, and then all that's left are the non-aligned demon primaries. And then they brought back Rabute. They brought back Gilliman and the Lion. And then rumors are
Lionel
there's
Johnson. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So and then there's always rumors about which other loyalists that they might bring back. So
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I find it very strange because again, I created those characters largely to be mythological, particularly the Space Marine Primarchs.
yeah,
But the I think the Chaos ones, because they're chaotic and hence have a certain relationship with time and space that's very wibbly wobbly.
yes,
Um, we made models of those for the Epic game, if I
yeah,
remember right.
yeah. They did.
So we kind of reconceived them and visualized them for those games,
Yes,
which gave us a
they look a
which was interesting.
little. They look a little like the epic scale, like Mortarion's big in the shrouded. Magnus does not look like more like. I mean, I think he looks more like an ape in epic the way his pose
Okay.
is. But he's a bit muscular and tall. Obviously he's the tallest out of all the Primarchs. And then Angron obviously looks angry. He's not, but he has armor. And then they've shown pictures of Fulgrim, and he does have the snake body. They did a Forge World version beforehand,
Yeah.
and so of him in demon form. And then they did this new one in plastic for the release. So
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about doing what are effectively greater demons
yeah,
is they can be anything you like,
yes,
and you know you're at liberty to give them all sorts of tentacles and make them as big as you want and all sorts of things. Games Workshop like doing things big. The reason being they can charge more money for them, and
yes,
it's vastly more. The more something approximates to a tank, the happier they are,
yeah.
because that's where the biggest margins are.
Yes, which is why we now have Imperial Knights and Chaos Knights in
Yeah.
40K, and then the super heavy vehicles for guard.
It's why they stopped doing Warhammer. In fact,
Oh, really?
yeah, well, sales are very low,
Yeah.
but also the the margins are the lowest on things um, that you have to make in bulk, and if they're small, so particularly things like goblins, you end up with a situation where to make the same margin, you have to charge like £5 for a goblin,
Oh,
and
wow.
you
Okay.
need 50 to make a regiment. And you go, oh, okay, nobody's going to do that, are they?
Yeah.
That's madness.
Okay. That's it's good. I'm happy to hear about like the early development of the game and things like that. But
Mm.
I originally asked you about Beyond because I've been collecting the Warhammer Historical books because I did play them when they first came out in the early days. I dropped off towards the end, but I played Warhammer Ancients, Legends of the Old West. I even played
Yeah.
Warmaster Ancients for a while, um, and so I just wanted to get and I just wanted to like kind of get the history because every time you or even Jervis talks to other podcasters, YouTube, no one ever brings up Warhammer Historical.
Right. Well, it's probably one of those things that most podcasters or YouTubers are interested in 40k or Warhammer. Yeah, it's the
Right.
fantasy and the science fiction that
But even the historical ones that I see when you guys talk to them, you talk about what's coming out. You talk about Black Powders, Hail Caesar,
yeah,
and all that, and some of the your history with like I watched Jordan Sorcerer, so your history with the GW in general, but
yeah.
nobody ever mentions Warhammer Historical.
Well, historical.
And
Well,
I
what,
feel a lot of the elements from Warhammer Historical translated over to either other GW games or your games with Warlord especially.
yes, well, to some extent, that's because I would have worked on both. But uh, the yeah, the thing about Warhammer Historical was it was really a personal project. Um, what happened was it started with an idea from myself and Jervis, and we we'd been playing a game called Tactica,
Yes.
which was a set of ancient war games rules. I think by a chap called Artie Conliffe.
Yeah, it is. I have a copy.
Right.
I have a lot
Well,
of old 80s,
a lot
90s.
of yeah. Well, so do I.
I like to collect.
Mm, yeah, it's hard to let go, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Well, what happened was we got hold, I don't know how we got hold of it, but we got hold of a copy of Tactica, and this would be in the mid 90s, and we were very impressed by the standard of production because compared to almost all historical war games products at the time, this was really smartly done. It was almost to a Games Workshop standard.
Yeah.
So it got photographs, colour photographs inside. Now remember, this is the days before digital cameras. We
Yes.
might just have started to get the very first digital backs for our large format cameras, but you know, there was no. You'd still be sending them to a reprographics house and so on and so forth. So most war games rules was still in the that primitive stage of being text only with rather poor hand quality, hand drawn diagrams.
Yeah.
If you were lucky, you got a colour cover. You know, it was they were still really quite primitive. And Tactica came out, and it looks really nice, very nicely presented, well explained, and cheery. So we thought, well, this is quite a good thing because you know I've always been an ancient war gamer. That's my background, and I had 2 or 3 ancient armies just stashed away
Hmm.
that I'd had since I was a teenager. So I think we started playing with my Romans versus my Seleucids. Rather unlikely combination, really, but nonetheless, we started playing with the tactical rules, and we had 3 or 4 really interesting games. But both being games designers, we started to go, yeah, it's really clever, but this bit doesn't quite work, and this bit
Right.
doesn't quite work. And in particular, particularly the original Tactica, you had to have the armies were fixed.
Yes.
Yeah, there was no variation in the armies. Your army had to be this, and it was a little unfriendly in that respect. And after a few games, we looked at each other and we almost said, you know, if we just used Warhammer, this would work quite well.
Hmm.
Because the latest Warhammer we'd done, think, I think we was when we first started. I'm sure that we hadn't quite got around to the second edition, to the 5th edition,
Okay.
1996 game. So it had been before then. So we started to use Warhammer to play basic ancient games, and we thought this works quite well. And at the same time, the Perrys were doing, I think, Egyptians and Hittites
Okay.
for Wargames Foundry, and they'd got into that kind of groove. So we organised some games around at, I think it was Alan Perry's house, and we played some very brief campaigns. And there's a campaign system in ancient battles,
Yeah.
and that's the campaign system we used. It's the sort of thing where you played a series of games over the day and got bonuses as you played, and they allowed you to either add pieces or get special abilities that you could dispense once per game, sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, and again, we thought, you know, this is all quite working pretty well. Why don't we have a go at writing it up? So I can't quite remember what happened. I think Jervis probably started the thing off because he's quite good at that, just getting enough together to play a game.
Right.
And then I finished it off because I'm quite good at that.
Okay. Very complimentary
uh,
to each other.
yeah, well, and also Jervis would have been perhaps pulled on to something else. So we had this game, and we had an ambition to publish it. And I think what happened was, I was just flicking through. Yeah, we really wanted to do it independently. So it's me, Jervis, and the Perry twins.
Mm-hmm.
So it's four of us. And we thought we'd really like to publish this, but we work for Games Workshop. Games Workshop won't want to publish it because it's an ancient wargaming book.
Right.
So I went to, at the time I was I'm a director of the business. So, at board level. So I obviously I'm working with the effective owner, the actual owner at the time, Tom Kirby, CEO, and the finance director, and all those guys. They're kind of like, they have the offices next to me.
Right.
So I go to Tom and I basically say, we'd like to publish this, and is that okay? And I rumble. Well, the problem is, it's called Warhammer, and it essentially used the same text and the same mechanics as Warhammer. I said, well, so the upshot of this was we couldn't actually go off and publish it ourselves. It was deemed too close to what we did for a living.
Oh, right.
Therefore, we ended up making a compromise, which was we formed a joint venture company with Games Workshop. So Warhammer Historical Wargames started out as a joint venture company owned with Games Workshop. But the terrible thing was that the investors who were effectively our owners at the time insisted that the joint venture be something like 75-25. So Games Workshop would own 75% and the rest of us 25%.
Okay.
Well, we didn't really care much. We just wanted to publish it.
Right.
But that's what we did. We said, okay, we'll form a joint venture company, Warhammer Historical Wargames, and we'll publish Warhammer Ancient Battles. And Tom said to me, that's fine, but it must not touch the edge. It mustn't have anything to do with Games Workshop. You have to have it printed. You have to store it and sell it yourselves. I said, okay, we can sort of do that. So, all the illustration in this is done by what is Warhammer Ancient Battles I'm talking about. Was done by the Perrys or by Dave Gallagher.
Okay.
All of the photographs were taken, I think, they were taken at work, but we kind of paid someone to do it on the quiet after hours.
Right.
All the stuff's either painted by me or Ali Morrison or Dave Andrews. He helped us a little bit. All the Perrys, and the cover is by Dave Gallagher, and I commissioned that off him and bought that off him.
Okay.
So it was all paid for by me and Jervis, basically by me, I think, because at the time I couldn't afford it. And we still have the Games Workshop buyers and printers do it, but we paid the bill.
Okay.
So we kind of used our connections, but we did it ourselves.
Okay.
Yeah, basically, I think the typesetting must have, what was it done on? It was desktop publishing at the time, but I think I don't know if it says, it might even say inside who did it. Talima Fox. Yeah, Talima still works against Workshop. Friend of Lindsay's, my wife's, and she was one of our two production kind of editors. So the layout and everything would have been done by Talima. I suspect we would have bunged her some money. She would have come in at the weekends and done it.
Okay.
That was the usual routine.
All right.
So we sneaked it in. We had 2,000 printed, I think. It might have been 3. It's sort of the minimum you could print in those days. Nowadays, you can print almost nothing.
Yeah.
And get away with it. In those days, you couldn't. You had to print at least 3,000 or something. Otherwise, the cost was just astronomical. So a great big articulated lorry pulled up outside my house. I live on a country lane. And a chap unloaded a pallet full of Warhammer Ancient Battles to my front door. Oh, thanks. So we then had to break down this pallet on the street into boxes, carry them through my house and into my garage where they sat. So 3,000 copies of Warhammer Ancient Battles sat in my garage. And then we organised a post office box, which was my office at work.
Okay.
And the post office box was, if you wanted this copy of Warhammer Ancient Battles, you had to send us a cheque. And that would be the only way of doing it in those days, or a postal order.
Yeah.
And I would dutifully take the orders and I'd bring in a box of, or a couple of boxes of Warhammer Ancient Battles, and we'd sneak into the mail order department to Games Workshop. And we would generally, the Perrys and Jervis would do most of this, but I helped on occasions. We'd pack orders, put them in the post, and we'd arrange to pay for the postage.
Okay.
So we were taking advantage slightly of Games Workshop's postage facilities, but we were still accounting for it. And that went on for a bit. And that's how Warhammer Ancient Battles, Warhammer Historical started, just as a project to get that game out. And then, after a while, we sort of negotiated some compromises where the stock would move into a corner of the warehouse. We didn't have to carry it. I could have my garage back. And then we arranged to print a first supplement. The first supplement was by Nigel Stillman. I think it was the Chariot game, Chariot Warfare.
Chariot Wars.
Chariot Wars, yeah. Which is very, it's quite erudite. That goes with the Perrys, Hittites, and Egyptians that they were making at the time.
Yes.
So that the enthusiasm, and Nigel's got a degree in Egyptology. So that's his thing.
Oh, okay.
He's the only person I know who can both read and speak ancient Egyptian.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and that's still his thing, really. So we did that, and we got a few compromises along the way. But it was still, for quite a while, even when we were doing supplements for the ancient rules, I think Jervis did a set of army lists. In fact, he did two, I think. Which sold very well, and it was starting to sell reasonably well. And we sort of said, well, after a point, we kind of said, look, this is getting to be too much for us to do, so how about we employ someone to look after it? And at that point, I think we decided that we'd have to kind of absorb it into Games Workshop. Well, considering that originally Games Workshop wanted nothing to do with it, this was we weren't getting any benefit from being 25% owners of this thing.
Right.
The fact that it was a joint venture was not benefiting us in any way, and it wouldn't do unless we started to reap massive profits from it. But it was never intended to do that. It was just a way of expressing our hobby. So we persuaded Games Workshop to kind of buy us out and employ someone to basically look after it. And that someone was Rob Broom.
Okay.
Who was someone we knew. He ran a society called Warhammer Players Society in England, who were basically the little society that ran all the freelance competitions in the UK.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they published a little magazine, I think, and they were quite the thing in the day.
Yeah, I remember being part of their forum.
Yeah.
Just for information when I played.
Well, we got on well with Rob. We liked Rob. And he was looking for a job, I think, at the time. So it seemed like a good marriage. And Rob went on to then run it and commission other projects. I think John Stallard, very early, seeing that Ancient Battles had done well, John wanted to do the English Civil War version, which he did. Yeah. I can't remember how he wrote that, because John's not a writer, really. But he definitely did it. Well, yes, and that was reasonably popular. Did okay. I can't remember what we did after that.
I have the full list.
We
After
did a
English
lot of
Civil War,
supplements. Yeah,
it
English Civil
was
War.
Shield Wall.
Yeah, that's an ancient supplement. That's oh gosh, I can't remember who wrote that. But that was basically the guys who owned Gripping Beast, I think.
You know what it doesn't say.
Yeah.
It says
But
design. Oh,
certainly,
designer Stephen Patton.
yeah, yeah. I think he was one of the people that was associated with, or maybe even still associated with Gripping Beast. Uh, they definitely helped out with it.
Mm. So yeah. So
Yeah.
how did you guys decide what periods to do? Was it just whoever wanted to do it or showed a passion for it?
Well, originally, yeah. So the Ancients one, and then the first batch of supplements was definitely that. And then after that, it was people would approach us and they'd go, "I've got an idea for a Warhammer Ancient Battles supplement," and we'd basically go, "Oh, you okay? Well, give us a kind of idea of what you want to do. Sounds great. Go ahead." And half the time people would do it, and half the time they wouldn't. And manuscripts would turn up out of the blue years later, or not at all. And some of the guys were great, and some of them were a bit, half-arsed about it, to be honest. And it's the way with things, because enthusiasm to do it and the doing it are two different things, aren't
Oh
they?
yeah, I'm very well aware of that.
Yeah. But some of the guys did brilliantly, and some of the best supplements were done by other people. I think Jeff Jonas did the supplement for Alexander the Great, which is fantastic. It's one of the best ones.
Hmm.
The guy who did the Beyond the Golden Gate supplement was quite an expert as well, and that was well liked. I thought it was a bit overdone, but
That
it was a
was
great
the
supplement.
Byzantium one, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, that was good. Shield Wall was good. They were all great in their way, uh, and they were all done by people who were either experts or who were real enthusiasts who were prepared to do quite a lot of groundwork and get it all together.
Okay.
So it was done on that basis. Once Rob Broom was running it, it was really community led as much as anything.
Okay.
And to some extent, there was a sort of internal Games Workshop mates thing going on. So if somebody had a hammering to do something,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking of Trafalgar, I think the naval game.
Yeah, that was my other question as we progressed from Ancient Battles. You
Yeah,
eventually did a 1.55 version,
yeah, that was like an update.
and then there was a
Uh,
2.0 before. I think that was
the
the
2.0 was going to be a complete revision of Warhammer Age, but I think it was by you've probably got it there. Mark,
um.
somebody names
It
slipped my
doesn't
mind.
say because it. I'm looking on Board Game Geek for all
Okay,
this, so it's not me remembering. My memory's
yeah,
good,
no,
but not that good.
it should be. I was in my head a minute ago, and it's gone now. But anyway, it was a complete revision, and it was commissioned from a chap who was a great Warhammer Ancient Battles player. And
Okay.
the problem with it was that before it was even before the manuscript was even in, there was a lot of controversy over certain elements of it, and because Rob Broom was managing the process, he wasn't writing it.
Oh, okay.
He was trying to coordinate player feedback via forums with the work that was being done on it,
Oh.
and it was a bit of a. So you're getting these clashes. Some people wanting it one way, some people wanting it another. So it was a bit of a. Although it was getting there, and I think Rob always said that in his head he had it figured out. When Rob left, it was very much not figured out. And Rob didn't leave. What happened was the powers that be decided Warhammer Historical Wargaming wasn't worth the candle, and
Mhm.
they were going to give up on it. I thought, oh, okay. I
Yeah,
think
that
at
seems
that
to happen.
time, Games Workshop had grown, and the fact that it was always a bit of an indulgence. To some extent, it was a fly in the ointment. It was never liked by senior management. It was always regarded as being a distraction. And you know how it is in businesses. Sometimes the culture moves one way and it moves another way, and it was moving in a rather authoritarian way.
Right.
rather intolerant of these little indulgences, which it was, to be fair.
Was this also when they stopped supporting all the specialist games
Probably,
around the same time?
yeah, yeah. It might have been at a time when Games Workshop's fortunes were not great, and therefore anything that was seen as
Yeah.
because we went through phases. Often it was ultimately it was due to poor management at the top.
Mm.
There could be no other excuse. Um, it was blamed on various things. Often things like Pokemon. Oh, Pokemon! Everyone's buying Pokemon. That was, but yeah, right,
Yeah.
okay. And then the other thing was the Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings did fabulously well, like what I planned, because But I never planned for people to stop selling 40k and Warhammer,
Right.
or for the sales companies who were all independent, financially independent, to just go off on one and start spending money like it was going out of fashion. The idea was we would always treat Lord of the Rings as an extra, and that we ring fence the money, and we would create a war chest. Instead of which, all the sales companies just splurged. They started to spend money on more staff who were just hobbyists and weren't sales staff.
Mm.
Massive new headquarters in our Rome office, marble floors,
Oh my God.
all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it was all due to poor management, particularly at that senior level. Um, so costs went through the roof. And all of a sudden, Lord of the Rings, like what it was always going to do, like what anyone could have seen it was going to do, all of a sudden, we were not making money, losing money even.
Hmm.
And this was referred to internally as the Lord of the Rings effect. The
Right.
Lord of the Rings has destroyed us. I'm thinking, this is not the Lord of the Rings effect. This is the crap management effect.
Right.
And I may have said this a little too loudly because obviously my days were numbered.
Yes.
Um,
I have
but
experienced that too.
yeah, but I think that's what it was. It was poor management. But anyway, as part of the rescue effort, a lot of things were cut that were probably needed to be cut. I can't argue with that. And one of them was Warhammer Historical War Games, which was a relatively tiny part of the bit. It was always tiny.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the problems with it was that it was audited internally because it was always a separate company within the business. That meant it had to have a set of accounts that were done to the same level as every other internal company, including Games Workshop USA, Games Workshop Canada, Games Workshop
Yes.
France, everyone. The cost of doing the accounts was more than the profit that the company made. So internally, it made a loss.
Right.
Well, I always just say, well, that's because you're making the accounts costs, which is an internal account. It's
Yeah.
not real money, is it? So it cost of having an accountant look at it was more than the bloody profit. What can you do?
Yeah. I think that was the time when they had, because remember they had the Glen Burnie offices in the
Yeah,
U.S. I think that's when they closed all of that. Because I had a friend that worked out there, and then he came back because they let him go because they closed off a lot of the, at least the upper management items
yeah,
in the U.S. And I think that was the time they pulled away from social media because I remember them closing their Facebook accounts
yeah. Could
and
be.
and their forum that they had at the time. Because it used to be really
Well,
popular for the forum, and then all of a
I
sudden
know.
they were gone.
With Tom Kirby, the guy who ran Games Workshop, the CEO at the time, he hated social media, and he
And that
absolutely.
tracks.
This is the man who, in the mid 1990s, when social media was in its infancy, was said, "This is nothing to do with Games Workshop. This will never have any get all this social media business. It's a computer geek thing. Computer geeks will be interested, but it won't have any other effect. The whole this internet business,
It's
it's
passing fad.
it's a passive fad. It'll never affect our business." And he stuck to that for about 20 years.
Oh my God.
So Games Workshop's fortunes have really gone through. I mean, we have really picked up in the last few years
Yes.
since Tom Kirby left.
Yes. Well.
Yeah, I wonder why. It's ironic because because Tom himself has made an absolute fortune out of more than anyone else out of the business.
Right.
Yeah. and
But
deservedly so. He put his entire fortune and everything on the line in the early '90s to buy it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
So
you
so
do
we talked
think,
a little
yeah,
about the supplements Warhammer for Ancient Battles, which I believe is still played in a lot of like conventions and in garages still.
it could be.
I see it
It's
once.
a
I
good
see it
set of
once in a
rules.
while at our local conventions. I see it once in a while, not every time. And sometimes it's a tournament. Sometimes it's just games that use the rule set.
Yeah.
But I still see it
Is it?
being
Is this the
used.
second edition or the first
You know
one
what?
and a
I
half?
don't know. I can't remember. I'd have to see each one. It could be. It's probably a mix of all of it because I don't think
Yeah.
everybody was able to get the second edition.
Yeah. Well, the second, as I say, was a bit of a mess. Once Rob had gone and they closed down the Warhammer Historical, they had this half-finished manuscript and asked me what we should do with it. I looked through it and I said, "You should put it in the bin." And said, "We can't put it in the bin. We've already spent theoretically all these man hours on it, so we have to see a return on it." And I said, "Well, I'll do the best I can with it, but honestly, I, I think it's a mistake." So I did. I took it on and I basically finished it with the author, but it was then straight to print, and it really needed to go to at least a decent editor
Right.
because there are lots of very fundamental mistakes in it, which I always thought was a shame because it spoiled it really.
Right.
Uh, but I've never really played it. The version of Warhammer Ancients that I've played is always the first one.
The first. Okay. I think most people play 1.5, but I'd have to like really look
Well,
at
it's
it.
essentially the same one. It's got a
Yeah, it's
few
just with
little
updates and
twiggles.
rubber rata and things like that. So with the other supplements, like you mentioned, high seas, like Trafalgar, high seas. Those were just people who had a passion for it.
Yeah, that's it. And then Rob would have organised that, and they would have been played internally. Some of those I helped with because the guys were around. And they said, "Oh, do you want to play this, Rick?" I said Trafalgar. I think I helped with
Right.
just play testing, uh, and then there was a series including the Wild West, the Western
The
Gunfight
Legend
rules.
of the Old West, which is what I played,
Yeah,
and
yeah, that's based on the Lord of the Rings.
yes, I noticed that when I started playing it, when I was like, oh, this is just like World of the Rings. So it was a lot easier for me anyway to grasp and to get the
Yeah,
game relatively quickly. I know people still play that. For Warmaster Ancients, was
oh, that was me.
that was
That
I
was that
figured
was
it
me
was
being
because
indulgent again.
it was
Uh,
Warmaster, so
yeah, so because I'd written Warmaster and I thought, this would make a great ancient game. It's a bit like Warhammer, really.
yeah.
To make a great ancient game. And at the time, there were some interesting 10 mil figures coming out. So I did a conversion of it. And really, it's the best version of Warmaster, in my opinion,
Okay.
because the early versions of Warmaster suffered a little bit from me trying to be, how would you put it? I set myself a task when I did the original Warmaster of not replicating mechanics out of Warhammer.
Okay.
It was just an intellectual exercise. But some of the mechanics that I came up with didn't really work as well as they would have had I just copied from Warhammer. So in the end, after some addenda and changes and whatever, we got to a more workable version of the Warmaster rules, and that was Warmaster Ancients.
Okay. How
And
much of that to carry over to Hail Caesar?
not a
Or
great deal, but I carried what happened with Hail Caesar. I'll come back to Black Powder in a moment because Black Powder is an interesting one in terms of its
okay.
relationship with Warhammer Historical. But with Hail Caesar, again, it was Jervis who said, "Why don't we try Hail Caesar? Why don't we try using Warmaster with the larger scale figures?" Because what had been happening? This is in respect to Black Powder, really.
Okay.
Um,
You can take it
because
in any direction you want.
yeah, what it was when we started playing big Napoleonic war games around at Alan Perry's house. When
Hmm?
I say big, I mean these games would start just after work, so 6 o'clock, and by midnight we'd just be getting into musket range with hundreds and hundreds of figures on a tabletop that's 12 feet by 6 feet, 28 mil figures,
Yeah.
regiments. And we were using, I don't remember, it might have been, what was it? It was a conventional set of Napoleonic rules at the time, with standard movement rates and so on.
Yeah.
And it was just taking us forever to move all these units and get actually into range of each other. So we weren't getting games finished. Midnight would come round, and we just about got to grips with the game. So you go, well, not very satisfactory, really. So Jervis came up with this idea. He said, well, why don't we use Warmaster to play these games? And bear in mind, these are Napoleonic games.
Yeah.
He said, we could just kind of say every unit, instead of having 3 stands, every unit's got 3 kills, 3 wounds.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll just translate all the distances over into something that works better in inches. And, the number of attacks will be as per 3 stands in Warmaster, a unit. We'll just say that's the number of attacks the unit has.
Okay.
And then when it comes to the orders, well, we're not going to be moving a unit of 20 figures once testing, moving twice testing, moving, like in Warmaster, you test every time.
Yeah.
So we'll just do this kind of thing. We'll go, well, say what you're going to do, and then we'll make the dice test and see how well you do it.
Yes.
Rather than it being a pass or fail, it can be a pass or a pass by +2 or +3 to give you the extra moves that you would have had in Warmaster. So it's a rough and ready conversion of the Warmaster system to allow us to play Napoleonic games. And that's pretty much how it started.
Okay.
And Jervis just did 2 sheets of A4 with the stats on.
Yeah.
And we just went for it. And after a while, the 2 sheets of A4 became a little bit more than that. But the game mostly existed in our heads. And we thought it'd be really good to write this up. And Jervis kind of never did. He produced stat sheets and things. But he said, well, I'm just too busy. So I said, I'll tell you what, it's the same story as Warhammer, Age of Battle. I'll have a go. Because so I had a go. And the thing about Black Powder and that whole style of gaming is it's utterly reliant upon the players to say because you have to say what you're going to do and then do what you said. It's very, it's negotiable. It's not a set of rules in that respect. It's a set of conventions.
Uh-huh.
And you have to be playing with people who understand what you mean. And to some extent, every playing group will reach a consensus amongst themselves about what they mean. When they say, I'll move up to the ridge and fire, or I'll charge, or whatever. So I had to kind of structure the game to reflect that. Okay. So the whole approach, that gentlemanly wargaming approach,
right,
comes from that. It comes from that's the only way you can play that game. And finding that way of writing the rules was the trick. And once I got that, I worked it all through. And again, we had a set of War Games rules, but now it's for Black Powder War Games.
Okay.
And we were going to publish it through Warhammer Historical War Games.
Oh, okay. Was this before or after the Waterloo supplement?
It was probably after.
Okay.
It's probably after. But at that time, it'd be I say it's after, I'm not quite sure, it'd be 2008. So maybe it was just before.
Waterloo was 2011.
Oh, okay. In that case, it was well before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Historical shut down in like 2012.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was the shutdown. But Rob leaving was a bit before then.
Okay.
But John Stallard left Games Workshop. And John Stallard was my co-director. He was sales director and my friend. We'd worked at Games Workshop together since, I don't know, 83, I think.
Oh wow.
and he went on to found Warlord Games.
Yes.
But John left Games Workshop in 2008, and when he left, he said, "Would it be okay if he took the manuscript for Black Powder and published it himself?"
Right.
And at that time, Warhammer Historical was definitely it was in the eye. The eye of Sauron was upon it. So we knew that this was always going to be awkward, and the path was not looking. It was looking rocky, if not downright terminal. So John asked Tom Kirby if he could have it. I think he might have asked me first, but Tom said yeah, which is good of Tom because he didn't have to.
All right. Yeah.
It was. So that manuscript went to Warlord, and then I finished it at Warlord, or I helped Warlord finish it.
Yeah.
Even though I was still working at Games Workshop at the time. So, but it was okay. That wasn't an issue. So Black Powder came out. So you asked about Hail Caesar. Hail Caesar was just me going, well, wouldn't it be great to do an Ancients version of Black Powder? Not least because Warlord Games were selling Ancients things. So we always thought we'd do an Ancients version.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems natural to use the same system that worked for Black Powder. And
bleeding obvious, we would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the thing to do. So that's happened. So Hail Caesar really is based on Black Powder, which is based on...
Okay, there we go. I think I got the order wrong in my head about which came out first.
It's not an obvious order.
Yes.
It's gone from being a fantasy medieval style game to being an ancient war game to being a Black Powder game to being an ancient war game.
Yes.
And then Steve Morgan did a pike and shot version of it. So
yes.
Pike and shot war game, and then I took it to an ancient war game.
Okay.
That's as far as, there you go. Which is my third set of ancient war games rules, really, that published.
Yeah, because Warhammer Historical, I think, like I mentioned, I mentioned to you before we started recording about how I was able to, like, towards the end, they put out, Historical put out less of the, I think it was less of the ancient supplements and more of, like you mentioned, Trafalgar. I mentioned Waterloo.
Yeah,
I can't pronounce this correctly, but Kampfgruppe.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's Warwick in Raid, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yeah, Warwick was one of the team. He worked for the Forge World.
Okay. Yes, and then Great War, which I like World War One in general, I know not many people do. Maybe not nowadays with all the World War One games coming out right now, but
I think it's because it's got that slightly steampunky thing going on with World War One, isn't it?
Yeah, there's right now there's Trench Crusade is the big one right now, and then there was Daggerfell. There's the Osprey one. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I know there was a third one, and then there's a couple of World War One games in development that I'm aware of. But it lends itself because of the nature of the battles, I think, to that grim, dark.
Well, I think Forge World kicked it off.
Yes, very much so.
I felt it was a mistake for this very reason. Forge World was run by a chap who's a real armor enthusiast.
Okay.
And a historical armor enthusiast. Doesn't particularly like fantasy or science fiction. You find this a lot with these companies. Funny, isn't it? And so all the Forge World stuff that he was churning out for Horus Heresy had a very World War One historical feel to it. Some of it very strongly so, with the star helms and gas masks. And I thought the closer you get to a historical archetype like that, the more vulnerable your IP becomes, because you can't stop other people doing versions of World War One.
Yeah.
Steampunky World War One.
Yeah, and now you have all these. Yeah.
It's generic, isn't it?
Yes. Very hard to copyright history.
And that's exactly what happened, of course. Yeah, but that's the reason I didn't like it. I thought it was starting to dilute the uniquely 40k imagery.
Mm.
But hey, people like these things. You can't argue with the.
Yeah,
You can't argue with that.
yeah, and like I said, I mentioned so two, and then the last book was Rick Toffin's Flying Circus.
Yeah, I've got a copy of that as well. That's Owen Branham, I think. Who?
Yeah, Owen Brannon.
Yeah, who again was one of the Forge World guys.
Oh,
He
okay.
might still be there, or he might just have retired.
Yeah, that one is probably the hardest to find because I don't think they
Yeah.
made many copies.
Well, they were operating at the end on a print to
Yeah,
forget basis, because just turn it over and forget. But they were still an internal hobby horse publisher.
yeah,
In fact, more so towards the end, because when we were running it, we were open to other people sending in, particularly supplements,
yes, yes.
and just publishing things for it. But towards the end, it became an internal thing, really. So I think practically all of the books that were released, well, probably after 2008, would have been on that basis.
Right.
Somebody's got a good idea.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm trying to think of how to word it. I know I always ask this whenever I talk to a designer is there anything would you want to you wish you could or may go back to and redo or wish you had a second shot at, I guess.
Yeah. Oh yeah, second bites of the cherry are always dangerous. Uh, yeah,
I
because
know
as a
you're
game
never
designer,
done,
you
just like an artist, your work is never completely done.
yeah.
But you
And I tell you the odd thing is what it is when you write a war game, you you often there are often bits of it where you don't quite have the balance right. That you've There's too much detail somewhere where people don't care, and there's not enough detail in somewhere where people suddenly become fixated. So the
right.
balance of the game is so in trying to address those things in the second edition, what's tempting to do is just to cut the detail where you don't need it and add it where you think it might be appropriate. But people don't like that because they don't like cutting anything.
Right.
Players just like to label more stuff on. So second editions, if they're player led, they just tend to they tend to get heavier and heavier and heavier. Whereas if they're designer led, they can be a little bit the other way around. And people go, oh, I don't like that. So if you look at, Jervis did a version of Epic Space Marine or Epic for 40k. There's I think there's third edition where he cut the rules right down, made it much
Oh,
more
yes,
streamlined,
it was
simplified.
third.
So yeah,
Yeah.
and people hated it. Well,
Uh,
that's not true. Half the people hated it, and half the
uh,
people loved it, which is what you expect.
I was the half that did not care for it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm not surprised because you buy into something, don't you? You buy into it
Yes.
with all of its wrinkles and everything. And I think that shows you the danger of going second bite of the cherry.
Yeah.
So there isn't anything really. I mean, the only thing I would have liked to have done was at Games Workshop. Do you remember way back, quite a long time ago, when we were talking about how I joined Games Workshop to do Rogue Trader, that spaceship game,
Yes, I was
that
going to bring that
spaceship
up.
trading game that was the
Yes.
original Rogue Trader that kind of fell by the wayside. It was going to be as an appendix in the original Rogue Trader book, incidentally, but I ran out of space. So it ended up on the cutting room floor. Well, I've always wanted to do a science fiction ship combat game. I'd written loads when I was a kid, and Rogue Trader was that game in its original form.
Hmm.
And then when it came to doing a spaceship game at Games Workshop, um, I was kind of senior management at the time, and I thought, I really ought not to be. I don't have the time or the focus to do it, and in many
Right.
ways, it'd be better if one of the up and coming games designers could do it because they've earned their spurs. They've earned the right to do it,
Right.
by working on supplements and other things. And Andy Chambers at the time hadn't written a game, and little did we know, although I had an inkling, but little did we know at the time that really the concept of doing new games was suddenly to become very unfashionable
Right.
because no games could ever compare with 40k.
Yeah.
Uh, so it was a last chance in many ways. So Andy did Battlefield Gothic.
Yeah.
So I missed the chance, as it were. So a spaceship game is the only thing. But I've just done one.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. That
Yeah.
you just released a new game for spaceship
Yes, it's called
battles.
Space Battles, and it's available via Amazon. It's a kind of it's a cheerful print to order thing.
Okay.
So it's not all singing, all dancing, bells, whistles, plastic components, cards, and all that, like all modern games are. But none of that. This is 1970s style goodness, where you have to do it all yourself.
Okay.
Uh, and really, it's a game that I put together using playing cards.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's dice-free system, uses playing cards, and it was really done as a bit of fun. And I didn't intend to publish it at all. I was going to put it on a website. And then a friend of mine said he'd be very happy to publish it, so he's done that. And in doing so, we added a lot more to it, because that's always what happens when you decide to publish something.
Right.
You work up a bit of background and you add more variety and put a campaign system in and so on and so forth. So there's quite a lot in it, and it's quite fun. But it's not a game if you like super detailed, hyper realistic science fiction rules.
Okay.
Not a lot of recording, not a lot of sort of interplay with cards and recording and all that sort of thing. It's fairly fast and I would say quite much. It's not really brutal, but it's quick to play.
Okay. I
And
think
we've
people
been playing all
appreciate that.
sorts of things with it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That seems to be the trend nowadays in games that are more quick to play and not no longer playing till midnight for one game.
Yeah. Well, unless you play science fiction games, a lot of science fiction ship games are ridiculously complicated.
Well, I mean, I've played the old FASA Starfleet
Right.
game
Starfleet
and
Battles. That's going
yeah,
back, isn't it?
yes. So
That
and
dates you.
BattleTech, the original, the old BattleTech. The new version is more like 40K.
Yeah.
Um, but the I've played, and I enjoy the BattleTech one. I don't know if I'd play Starfleet BattleTech ever again, but that was a bit much.
Yeah.
But yeah, so but yeah, I look forward to it. I'll put a link in the description, the Amazon link to the rule set.
Yeah, there's a few pieces on YouTube as well about it.
Yeah.
I think I've put there's a video of me demonstrating the games.
Okay.
I think
I'll
which
put that
I did
also.
with Tom Evans,
Yeah.
who does a lot of Games Workshop interviews.
Okay. I'll look for it and I'll put a link to that too in the
Yeah,
description
that's
of the video. But I think that's it for today. I do have more questions, but maybe I can talk to you. We can schedule another time to talk about because I'm really curious about like your time with Warlord, your current time with Warlord, and all of that. But we could, but for what I wanted to talk about today, I think
yeah,
we're good.
yeah.
But
That would be yes on another occasion perhaps.
yeah.
All right.
But thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody that's listening.
I'd like to thank Rick for coming on and for the interview because I really appreciate it. And also thank you, the listener, for watching this on YouTube. And don't be sure to like and subscribe. And I'll have more updates for my obsession. I already have a couple things on the way. And hopefully I'll get more interviews in the future with different rules designers and model makers and things of that nature. And hopefully I'll have some battle reports coming out soon. But again, thanks for listening. Good night and have a pleasant tomorrow.